It seems that many things can be haunted. This includes haunted houses, cemeteries, and people. It seems that vehicles also make this list. They might not be as common, but they can certainly be just as scary. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we will be taking a look at these 3 haunted vehicles. Abraham Lincoln's Phantom Train. Before the US president's most prominent form of travel was the airplane Air Force One, it was in fact a presidential train. This was built after the US Civil War came to an end. Abraham Lincoln's newly elected Congress believed it was necessary for him to have an official transport. This was so he might travel across the country to mend the divisions that still existed. President Lincoln took a disliking to the whole idea, believing that this was an unnecessary waste of expense and an asset the office of the president did not need. As it turns out, he would never use it, at least not when he was alive. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., after which he was taken back to his home state of Springfield, Illinois. This would be his one and only trip on what would become the famous ghost train in America. The story of Lincoln's life was not unfamiliar to the supernatural. He foresaw his own death, telling a friend in early 1865 that he had a terrifying dream. "I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I left my bed and wandered downstairs. I arrived at the East Room. 'Who is dead in the White House?' I demanded of one of the soldiers. 'The president,' was his answer. 'He was killed by an assassin.'" Lincoln's ghost is also said to haunt the White House corridors, where he has been seen standing at the window of the Oval Office, hands clasped behind his back, staring across the Potomac, maybe bearing witness to the bloody battlefields beyond. Lincoln's funeral train stopped at all major cities and many smaller communities, with men, women, and children lining the route to pay their respects to the man who led the nation through its deadliest civil turmoil. This was against his widow's wishes. All she wanted was for Lincoln to be laid to rest in his home cemetery. But Lincoln's political colleagues insisted. Further to this, whilst the train journey should have arguably cut its way directly west to Illinois, a longer, more drawn-out zigzag route was made across America. Again, this came against Mary Todd Lincoln's wishes. But the president's men felt a grand display to people across the country was of more value. And it wasn't just President Lincoln's body that was on that train. His young son Willie, who died of fever in the White House 2 years before, was exhumed from his grave in D.C., and the skeleton also placed in that train. He was 11 years old. With all of this, Mary Todd Lincoln was too distraught to even make the trip. The funeral route was not even a year old before reports of a phantom train was being made. Every year since then, on the anniversary date of Abe's funeral trip, a strange sight is seen passing along the train's original route. A silent yet sinister phantom train passing along the tracks, even in places where tracks of the route, long gone, reappear once again. This train is seen to have a literal skeleton crew, whistles sometimes sounding or a puff of smoke from the ghost train also seen. There's also been reports that clocks would stop whilst the train passes by. This was a trip that Abraham Lincoln and his wife both insisted he did not need to make. But perhaps if the people so demanded it, they would make sure in the afterlife the people would see it year after year. The Golden Eagle Haunted Car. When we think of haunted vehicles, we think of ghostly apparitions appearing at whim before vanishing into thin air. But what about a possessed car that existed in a physical form? It almost sounds like something from a Stephen King novel, which it is. But it's also based on a true story. Stephen King's work, Christine, revolved around a vintage car possessed by an evil spirit, resulting in a number of demonic car kills. It seems that it doesn't deviate so much from the real account. The car was a 1964 Dodge 330, a four-door sedan that began life as a police car in Old Orchard Beach, Maine. Every officer that drove that car died, and not whilst driving it. Each of those 3 officers committed murder-suicides, brutally killing both themselves and their families. It then made its way into the hands of Wendy Allen, a woman whose nickname, the Sea Witch of Old Orchard Beach, perhaps made the evil car a suitable purchase for her. The The car, whilst in her possession, paused its killing spree, but supposedly not for the want of trying. Whilst hurtling down the highway, the Golden Eagle would randomly open its doors and lock the steering wheel, constantly looking to put Wendy Allen and her family at danger. However, perhaps with her knowledge of the dark arts, Wendy was able to suitably restrain the vehicle from carrying out any fatal consequences on her loved ones. But that didn't mean others were safe. Stories of the evil machine circulated the community, and members of the local church clearly didn't take kindly to this. They ended up vandalizing the car. Those who did would pay with their lives. One was hit by lightning, another decapitated by an 18-wheeler. Even just being in the vicinity of the vehicle could be enough to make you meet your end. 2 children hit by other cars onto the Golden Eagle both died before paramedics could even reach them. Even a kid who touched the car became possessed with the same maniacal behaviors as the original cops of the Golden Eagle, killing his family and burning his house down. The final death count of this car stands, supposedly, at no less than 14, enough for a church group to steal the car, chop it up and spread its pieces across various main junkyards. This might not be the end of the story, however, since Wendy Allen has been committed to tracking the chunks of her beloved demon car down and putting it back together. So who knows, perhaps the death count isn't its final tally after all. Surrey, England's A3 ghost crash. Christmas is a time of feasting and parties, of giving and receiving. However, if you're close to Surrey in England, you may be aware of the haunted A3 motorway. It was a dark December Sunday night in 2002 when a police force in Surrey, England received a flurry of calls. Drivers on the A3 driving south reported seeing a car lose control before leaving the road in a horrendous accident. The police took down the details and prepared to head out. Little did they know this would be the root of a ghost story that would go down forever in Surrey folklore. The police attended the scene, ready to come across the scene of an awful crash. What they found, however, was incredibly puzzling. It turns out that they had actually found nothing. Witnesses said they had seen the car swerve off the road, its headlights blazing as it plunged over the embankment into the woodland. At the reported location of the accident, police found no evidence of any wreckage. There was no car, debris, or tyre marks on the road, and the search for both car and driver yielded nothing. Even the woodland was untouched. An officer decided to go further into the undergrowth, and it was there that he made a startling discovery. A car headfirst into the undergrowth, the door smashed in, clearly the consequence of a motor accident of the same nature as the one reported. Except there was something odd about the scene. Spiderwebs hung from the car's side mirrors. Leaves completely covered the car and weeds grew around the wheels. More shockingly still, rather than a newly discovered body, the police officer stumbled upon a badly decomposed skeleton. This was not the scene of an accident that occurred a few hours previously. It had happened almost half a year earlier. It turns out the person in the car had been a 21-year-old man, reported missing by his brother several months ago. Police had no idea where to begin their search. He had last been seen out on the town, but nobody knew that he had then driven to Surrey after. Remarkably, the descriptions of the crash from those December witnesses were completely consistent with how police believed this crash from the months before had occurred. Those witnesses on the motorway that December night reported seeing a car leave the road in what they believed was a real accident. Police concurred with all the testified set of events, apart from, however, the actual date of occurrence. Is it that the crash the drivers witnessed was in fact a ghostly replay? The man's body was found outside the vehicle where, severely injured, he tried to crawl his way out of the undergrowth and back to the road for someone to find him. He could not make it up the steep embankment. It was then discovered later that a call was attempted from this man to his brother. His brother did not pick up, and again this man's efforts to be found went unanswered. So perhaps as the final roll of the dice, months later on a gloomy winter's night, this ghost crash was replayed when witnesses drove that same road and would be sure to find him, having seen the final vision of the deadly crash and the man's final moments as he headed over the embankment to the fate that awaited him. But what do you make of these 3 mysterious stories? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.